Serenity prayer. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference, just for today. Who's our speaker this evening?
Hi. I'm an addict from Baltimore, Maryland, and my name is Shelley. 3 years ago, my husband was asked to speak at a convention in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. All I knew about Oshkosh was that they made overalls there. And I was at a my mother had just died 3 weeks before that. 2 weeks prior to that, I had had my a cancer operation. My 17-year-old daughter was using drugs, and I was a mess. And the banquet speaker at that convention was the woman who I'm going to introduce tonight. The only thing she knew about Oshkosh was that we landed in the middle of a cow pasture and that they made overalls there. And we spent the day buying overalls for her grandchildren. And that woman gave me something that day that I desperately needed. She nurtured me. She shared with me. She went to a grief meeting with me. And she let me experience what I needed to feel. I left that convention the next day after hearing her at the banquet, and I thought that woman should have been my sponsor. We've remained in contact over the last 3 years. It's because of her I've gotten to share at a couple conventions. And I'm here tonight to introduce you to my sponsor, Fran O from New York.
Hi, I'm Fran. I'm an addict. This is a big room. First of all, before I forget, because I'm real lousy at it once I get into anything, I would like to thank the committee. I was very honored, and I always am when I get a phone call from out of state to come in. I always find it still fascinates me. I always wonder, how did they know about me? How does anybody know anything in NA? But it's really been a pleasure here, and from the time the phone calls first began with Wynette, she was wonderful. Everything just flowed. It flowed real easy, and even up until tonight when we walked into this room, this is probably the first banquet I have ever been at that had its doors open to let people in. Usually there's a line going for an hour outside. And I watched things get a little hectic, and I kept saying to Shelley, I can't believe how calm George is. By now I would have been a raving lunatic. I got a little nervous during the day today because something real uncomfortable, and this is mine, I'm not meant to make anyone feel bad, but I spoke at the World Convention this year, and there was quite a number of people in this room that were there. And all during the day today, people were coming up and saying to me, I heard you speak in Florida. It's the worst thing anyone can say to me. Because the next thing out of my head is, then why are you here to hear me again? It's like you've already heard it. I feel like I should come up with a new story, but there is no new story. My story is mine. But I always feel bad when people have heard it. Then they'll say, and I have your tape, and I listen to it, and it gets worse. My stomach goes into a knot. I always think I want to do something different. And there is nothing different. I am who I am. And I'm pretty happy with where I am today. There is no long war story. I always tell the same exact war story. I picked up a drug at the age of 15. I think I got drunk for the first time in my life, and I knew when I picked up that drink, I picked it up because I wanted to get drunk, so I started out wanting to abuse. At 15, I also wanted to become a nun. I had all those years of Catholic school, and I'm still convinced that's half my problem. But I wanted to be a nun, and I don't think that was unusual for women coming up in Catholic school. At 16, I was pregnant with my first daughter and giving birth. At 17, I was giving birth to my second daughter. And at 18, I was doing my first bid in the Women's House of Detention for prostitution. I don't know how I got from being that nun to being a hooker in the matter of 2 years, but that's how quick it was taking me. It went on from there, and for the next 6 or 7 years, I began to do life on the installment plan. I kept moving around, and as a result, I had a police record in New York, New Jersey, California. My problem was I kept taking me with me, but the crimes were getting more violent. I was getting more violent. I would love to stand up here and say I had a drug of choice. I didn't. There were things I would have preferred using, but I was someone who was going to get high at any cost. I often think back about my history of addiction, and I'm one of those people that realizes how sick I was long before I ever picked up anything. Before drugs ever entered my life, I was a liar, I was a cheat, I was a thief, and I was acting out all over the place before I ever got high. At the age of 18, I made a very conscious decision that I wanted to be a hooker. And I used to look at the other women out in the street, and they always, at 25, they looked like they were 40, and that bothered me. So I convinced myself the reason most of the hookers aged so bad was they didn't sleep right. So I decided that it was real important to get 8 hours sleep a night, so I started taking sleeping pills. Well, then I couldn't function very well the next day. I always had that kind of hangover, so I began to use ups the next day. So I was hooking before I went to the drugs. And then the drugs just went on from there. The one thing I always give myself credit for, and I find it amazing, listen to the young ones coming in, there was one part of me that always knew that I was totally crazy. And what I didn't need was to go up. I always knew, don't go near those ups. You're already too nuts, so I always had enough sense to come down and take that edge off. I didn't want to be crazier than I was. I was doing time in state prison in the state of California. By now, my 2 kids that I had tried to raise did nothing but see my back on the way out a door. I'd be gone for months at a time and then decide to come home and pay a visit for another month or so, and I was gone. And I was doing 1 to 14 in the state of California, and I was going to be paroled back to the state of New Jersey where my family was living. And one of the things that anyone here who's done time knows that when you're doing time, you go to all these good little things they have so that when you go to the parole board, you have this nice report to walk the hell out of here. So I played the game, whatever I needed to do. And NA was alive and well in the state of California. Not big, but alive. And they had someone come in to do this induction about what NA was all about. But it was also the 1960s. It was the years of the social workers where they used to come in and teach us how to bake cookies in prison. So you kind of put NA right in with them. I went because it looked good. And it was the first time I ever heard anyone talk about addicts had a disease. I didn't believe them, but I listened. At that time, alcoholism was pretty much considered a disease, but addicts were bad people who went to prison. Now, not only didn't I believe that it wasn't a disease, I also believed it had absolutely nothing to do with me. You see, there's times that I put drugs down for months and months at a time. I just never put the pistol down. And I never connected the two things. And I really thought to be an addict, you had to be putting a spike in your arm all day long, every day. And I didn't do that. I could stop for a while. So I really didn't think I had a drug problem at all. The thought that I was doing my fourth bid in the prison didn't mean anything. I listened. I thought it was nice that they came in, and that ended that. I was released. I went back to the state of New Jersey. My 2 kids were 10 and 11 at that point. And I didn't know how to tell anyone that I didn't want to leave that prison. Prison isn't a place where you walk around telling everybody, I don't want to go home. I'm one of those people that functioned 100% as long as I was locked up. It was out here. I couldn't cut it. And I was being sent home to 2 kids, and I was locked up with women who did nothing but talk about their kids, so I thought women were supposed to know how to be mothers, and they were supposed to like their kids. I didn't know how to be a mother, and I didn't dare tell anyone that either. I thought that was a secret. I came home, and one more time I said, never again. I said that every time I left the jail, and I meant it with all my heart every time I left the jail. And in a matter of no time, I was back doing another bid again. This time, again, I said, never again. And I really, honestly, didn't do a whole lot of things different. But there was one thing, for a change, I did do different. I never again picked up. If I ever doubted there was a higher power, I think back to my early years, because I have no idea how I didn't pick up. I was not the healthiest thing that ever walked into the rooms. I came home. I went looking for a job. I couldn't get one. I didn't have any skills. I was trying to deal with 2 kids I couldn't handle. I was back home with the same parents I couldn't handle. And all of a sudden I realized I didn't want to be out here. And I happened to pick up a newspaper, and I read about an organization of ex-convicts, and I thought, well, maybe that's a start someplace. And I made that phone call, and they were a start for me for a while. They were just a bunch of ex-cons who were getting together and trying to help each other. It wasn't about recovery the way we know it, but it was a start for me. And there was another woman there. And after a couple of months, she came into the office one day and she said to me, put on your coat because I can't stand you another minute. And I guess I was ready for something because she walked me into my first meeting. There was no NA yet. It was out in the West Coast, but it wasn't on the East Coast. So it was another fellowship. I had absolutely no idea why I was there. I had no understanding why anybody was laughing at the sad things I was hearing, so I thought they were all nuts. But she kept taking me back there night after night. And I kept going back night after night. I remember hearing people talk about these steps, but she hadn't told me anything about any steps. And I used to ask her, how come everyone else is doing steps and I'm not? And she used to tell me, you're too sick. Don't worry about it, just keep coming here. Now, the sad thing is, I can look back and realize how sick I really was, except I didn't know it. This was all I knew was the way I was, and I thought it was okay. I kept going back, and I think I was hanging around and going to meetings for about 9 months, and it was a summer night, and I pulled up to a meeting, and she was standing outside, and I was in a Cadillac. And I parked the car, and I got out, and she's looking at me. And she said to me, where'd you get the Cadillac? I said, it belongs to my boss. I had a job by now. And she said, you're telling me your boss gives you a Cadillac to come to a meeting in? And I said, yeah, he's a trick. And she says, what do you mean he's a trick? I said, he's a John. I turn tricks for money. And she's looking at me like, you can't be doing that in here. And I said, okay. Then I had about 13 months going to meetings, and she called me outside of an office one night, outside of a meeting, and she said to me, listen, one of the women in the meeting said you opened up your pocketbook to get out some cigarettes, and she saw a pistol. And I said, yeah. She says, Fran, what's the gun for? I said, the robberies. She asked me, what robberies? And I said, the ones I commit to pay my bills and my rent. She then told me I couldn't do that while I was here either. It really left me not knowing what anybody did, because I didn't know any other way. And I was really sick enough that when I came in and you said to me, all you have to do is don't pick up and go to a meeting, I took you literally. That all I had to do was not pick up. No one told me I had to do anything else about changing my life. I didn't hear any of it. That was the condition I came in here in. I've had the privilege of coming back from all of that, really coming back. So I tend to forget what I was like when I came in. And thank God for sponsees, because they can remind you. One of the things I tend to forget is when I walked in to a 12-step fellowship, I had just been released from the Institution for the Criminally Insane in the state of California. And I tend to forget that that's how crazy I was. I kept coming, and I stopped committing crimes. I stopped hurting other people, but I couldn't pull my own life together. I was in and out of relationships. If they needed a speaker in Philadelphia at 10 o'clock at night, I was there from New York. Anything not to be home with these kids, because I couldn't deal with them and I couldn't handle them. And I had nobody around to help me do that. And not only didn't have to feel guilty about not being a mother, I didn't have to feel guilty because I was out trying to help other people. So it looked like I was doing this good thing. And my life went on that way. And I was okay, but I wasn't happy. I had a nice apartment. My kids lived well, I lived well, but everything inside was wrong. And this went on for a long, long time. All of a sudden, I was at a meeting one night, and a friend of mine came up to me and she said, hey, did you ever hear of NA? And I said, yeah, when I was out in California. Why? She says, there's a few meetings around New York. And I said, where? She goes, I don't know. She says, they're underground. We got to find them. So we began going around to all the meetings, and little at a time, you started to hear people share, and you knew they had been someplace else. So we started to find them, to ask, where's this meeting? And NA had been around New York for about a year when I showed up on the scene. So I didn't help get it off the ground. I wasn't part of all of that. But I'm kind of glad I arrived when I did, because we were totally out of our minds. And every state that I know of, as NA came in, it took lunatics to get it off the ground. Nobody in their right mind would have tackled this. It took self-will. When I always laugh at conventions, and I was sitting next to Shelley, when you get to the tradition of, we don't have leaders here, we all govern this. You didn't know us when we started. There was no telling us what you wanted or what you didn't want. You were going to get what we were going to do. Now, the great thing about that is there was enough of us that each one was able to hold a cap on the others. So you couldn't get too crazy with this. It was fun years, it was crazy years, and I was glad I was part of it. But I also realized something different was happening in my life. And it took me a long time of being around NA before I realized, for me, what it was. And it was so simple, it was sitting in front of me. And it was our first step. There are fellowships that say they are powerless over alcohol. Some are powerless over pills. Some are powerless over food. We are the only fellowship that says we are powerless over our addiction. And one of the things that I came to know about me, and this is just for me, this addict is addicted to alcohol, to drugs, to relationships, to people pleasing. When I smoked, I didn't smoke 1 pack a day, I smoked 2.5. I am a tea drinker. I don't have 2 cups of tea a day, I have about 20. I have the ability of abusing the shit out of anything that can be abused. And what the first step of Narcotics Anonymous gave me was be able to integrate the steps I had learned into other parts of my life other than my drug use. And all of a sudden, I started to calm down. I was able to look at me and what I was doing. Now, I was kind of okay about being powerless over alcohol and drugs. But boy, was I having a bad time about being powerless over you. I wanted you to do this just the way I did this. And thank God you didn't listen. The second step I didn't have too much problems with. I really didn't. I understood the definition of insanity very clear. It was repeating the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. I did it all my life, and I do it today, and I will probably do it till the day I died. I've gotten better at it, but I still do it. I had a real bad problem with the third step, and it stopped me for a long time. I had a problem with God. Catholic school had done its damage. The God I knew was not a loving and forgiving God. The God I knew was the person who was going to get you. And you didn't even have to do anything wrong. All you had to do was think about it, and he knew, and he got you. And I figured this person I knew all my life was sending me to hell anyway, so chalk him up. He was gone. So as a result, I had a real bad time about turning things over. I really did, and having that higher power in my life. And at that particular time in my life, I began to realize I always had a belief in something. And what I was having a problem with was the word God. That's all. A lousy word. So I changed the word. And I call my higher power Harry. And Harry and I get along just great. I wish I could stand up here and say to you that I'm one of those spiritual people who get up every day and get on my knees and turn my will and my life over to the care of. I certainly do not. I get up probably every morning and for about a good hour run on 100% self-will. And I'm going to do this day my way. And from the minute I find myself aggravated and cursing, I'm in the car in rush hour, I decide my way is not working, so now it's time. But I'm good for Fran doing it her way for at least an hour a day. I'm also not somebody who's real comfortable praying, and if you are, it's wonderful. I just couldn't get into it. But I talk a lot to Harry. I talk to Harry all the time. It's my way of praying. And I always have a need to say that because no one told me that was okay in the beginning. I always felt like I was doing something wrong. I was going through a real rough time a couple of years ago, and a friend of mine from NA went with me into a church, because I stop in churches a lot. It never matters to me what kind of a church it is. And I was sitting there, and I remember looking up at the altar, and I said, listen, you, I think you're out in a goddamn slip because there's a lot of shit coming down the pike here. And I waited a minute, and then I looked back up and I said, listen, if I get through this one, you motherfucker, you owe me one. When we left the church, he's standing outside looking at me, and he says to me, that's the way you pray? And I hadn't realized he heard me. And I said, you know what? if you've taught me anything, you've taught me no matter what I did, the higher power never turned his back. So why would he start now? Because he doesn't like the way I talk. It makes me a lot more comfortable at Harry to know I can get mad at him when I want. I dreaded that fourth and fifth step because I think it has a reputation it doesn't deserve. And one of the things I've learned about it for me is it wasn't about anything else except trust. That was the whole issue of the step. Because after I did it, I waited for something to happen. And the only thing that happened was I could now walk into a fourth and fifth step meeting and say I did it. Nothing else happened. No big miracle. I didn't change. None of my behavior changed. One thing that did happen is I have done the fourth and fifth step a few times in my recovery. And each time I got a little bit more honest and a little bit more honest, except for one thing. There was one thing going to go to my grave with me that nobody was ever going to get. And again, that changed when I did my fifth step with a woman from NA. And what I realized is I finally let women into my life because all those years in recovery I hadn't. You see that suggestion about men with the men and women with the women? That was okay for you, but it didn't go for me. You see, I was different. And I didn't like women. I didn't trust women. And I came into NA and I felt the women were different and I didn't feel so judged. And I was finally able to sit with another woman and tell her what I swore I would never tell anyone. And she was one of my sponsees. And she was going to do her step with me, and I decided to do one with her at the same time. And that woman taught me the meaning of the word intimacy. You see, I always connected intimacy with relationships and sex. And I thought that's what it was all about. And it took another woman to teach me that it had absolutely nothing to do with that. That intimacy was allowing another human being to know me. And I mean really know me. No front, no hiding. And I finally trusted another woman enough to let that happen. Nobody but nobody warned me about those next two steps. And here comes 6 and 7 that set fire to my ass. Because I was in for a real rude awakening. I remember when I used to go to these step meetings and hear people talk about them. In my head, I thought anybody with an ounce of sense would want to get rid of what we knew as character defects and the things that were wrong. So I couldn't wait to get there, to let all these wrong things go. And it wasn't till I was really there that I realized no way did I want to part with any of this. And it took me, again, a few years before I realized the mistake I was making. I had heard people talking about character defects and shortcomings like they were bad things. And what I needed to do was to embrace them and to face the fact that they were my best friends. Without them, I would have been dead, and I would not have survived the streets. They kept me alive, they kept me safe, and you were asking me to give them up. And I realized I was going to lose something that was very, very precious to me. One of the things I couldn't do was cry. I was happy with that. And you were telling me I had to let go of that. And all of a sudden I realized, no, I wasn't ready to do that. I wasn't ready to do a whole lot of things. And I became a little easier on myself when I realized that I worked those steps to the best of my ability at the time that I was doing them. My ability just started to get better and better the longer I stayed clean. But it didn't mean everything had to happen at once. One of the things that I always talk about, and I make a joke out of it, but it's not funny because it really is an issue for me, was I finally realized that some of my character defects were ingrained in granite and they weren't going anywhere. So what I needed to do was learn how to live with them and work around them. And Shelley and I kid about this. One of the worst things in the world, I don't know anyone else that has the ability of annihilating another human being with gossip like I can. I really have a wonderful knack for it. And one of the things that I have learned to do when I go to a meeting is I sit up front. Now, I don't sit up front because it's the thing to do and you're supposed to sit up front and listen to the speaker. I sit up front because if I sit in the back, I take everybody's inventory in that whole room. I watch who's making eye contact with who, and once I annihilate the worst, let someone come into a meeting late, raise their hand, share, and leave. You're dead. So I sit there and I take care of everybody else's business but mine. So I am not ready to do anything about that. So what I've learned to do was sit up front, because when I'm sitting up front, I can't see you, so as a result, I don't talk about you. So I have learned how to try to work around my character defect, because I wasn't ready to let go of it. Making amends. One of the things that I have realized through the years is that the one thing this program has given me is exactly what I need at the exact minute I need it. And I have never, ever doubted that anymore, ever. And all of a sudden, I realized it took me, I want you to realize that each one of these steps took me years. I am not someone who went through 12 steps. Each one was a couple of years before it made any kind of sense in my life. And I was about making amends, and I did it the way any good dope fiend would. I started with the people who were the farthest away from me. And the ones who were real close, I left for last because I couldn't do it. And I realized the ones I was having the toughest time with were my kids. As a mother, I sucked. I am glad I didn't realize that, and I had the privilege of denial when I first came in the rooms. I was at a meeting today where I heard some women sharing about being parents, and they were pretty new in recovery, and they were talking about how no matter what else happened, they were able to be there for their kids. And I thought, oh my God, wait till you find out that you weren't. Because I don't know any drug addict who was there for anybody but themselves. I think in the beginning we need to hold on to that because it's too scary and it's too painful. Well, I had my kids left to make amends to. And I really felt bad about a lot of things. One of the things that I found the saddest was I could pick up a strange man on the street who I didn't know and in 10 minutes be laying up in some bed telling him I loved him. But I couldn't hold my kids and tell them that I loved them. It was a risk that scared the hell out of me. My youngest daughter, at the age of 16, picked up and became a raving addict from the day she picked up. I threw my entire program out the window, and I decided I was going to get this child clean. And for 2 years, we entered a war that made the Korean War, World War II, and Vietnam look like a piece of cake. And it took me 2 years before I decided I have a program, and I think I better start using it because this wasn't working. And we had become friends, and the war was over, and I knew that I could not do anything about her addiction. But I also knew it was time to do my amends. And I can remember a night she came over to the house, and I knew it was the night, and I was kind of upset, and she asked me what was the matter. And I told her that I was sorry for everything that had happened. And I wish I could turn this damn clock back and undo all that damage I had done. But I couldn't do that. And that I am trying to be responsible for today, and it was the best I could give her. And I think it was the very, very first time that I ever remember holding her and telling her that I loved her and that I was sorry. And it was the first time I remember her and I both crying together. And she told me she didn't blame me for her addiction, and she's luckier than most. She knows where to go when she's ready. And she left the house that night, and 24 hours later, I got the phone call that she was dead of an overdose. And I often think about that night with her. And I can remember putting the phone down when I got the call, and I remember looking up in the air and saying, thank you. Thank you that I don't have to spend the rest of my life wondering, why didn't I ever tell her I loved her? Why didn't I ever say I was sorry? And all of a sudden, being able to tell people how I felt about them became important. Because you see, I suck at that too. I have sponsees who I love with all my heart. And my way of letting them know I care is calling them a bunch of dizzy bitches. And they know my abuse means I care about you. And all of a sudden, when I thought about that night with Patty, I knew I needed to change that. But wanting to change something and being able to do it are two different things. It was going to take a whole lot of work at the risk of being able to say to somebody, I care. And again, it was women. They were the ones I had to work through because, again, I could tell a strange man because it wasn't true and it wasn't honest. But to be honest with another woman, it was like looking at them, I saw me, and God damn, that was scary. And I also knew that they could see the fear in me. And I didn't want anyone to know I was scared because that wasn't macho and that wasn't my image. I went on with the rest of my amends. And it was funny, it wasn't until I got into trying to meditate that I realized I knew how to close my mouth, but I didn't know how to shut my mind down. That even when I was trying to be quiet, my mind was going a mile a minute, and you can't meditate when you're going a mile a minute. And I can remember somebody in NA saying to me, why don't you try a library? They forgot I was an addict. Try a library because it's nice and quiet there. And I can remember going to this library and sitting there and beginning to watch who was checking out what book and wondering why they were doing that. And all of a sudden that sometimes the books didn't match what the people looked like, and I realized there's my mind going a mile a minute again. And that's the step that took me to a church. And only because it was quiet. And I find something real peaceful in that quietness. Trying to bring these steps into living my life was the hardest thing I think I ever did. It took a lot of years before I could mellow out. I was probably a real horrible sponsor for a long time because if I was hard on myself, it meant I was going to be hard on you. And I gave my sponsees a lot of grief. And all of a sudden, a calming down came, and I realized that having to do this the right way wasn't important. What was important was doing this the best way we could. Intellectually, I really, really believe the best gift anyone can give themselves when they first come in this room is not to get involved in relationships or a sexual. It really is the best gift. But if people come in, and if screwing somebody every night of the week is what keeps you here, knock yourself out. Because eventually you're going to hear something, and you're going to start to calm down, and you're going to be okay. So I've kind of leveled out that as long as somebody's coming in here and not picking up, that's it for today. We'll take the next step tomorrow. And I felt real calm, and what was happening is I was beginning to forgive myself and to be calmer with me in my life. In relationships, it didn't change all at once. What I started to notice was my relationships were getting a little bit better. They didn't go from bad relationships to good relationships. Each one got a little better than the one in front of it. And I realized my choices were getting a little better. My life was getting a little better. I went on and did a whole lot with my life. The 12th step is probably the most emotional of them all for me, because it's given me something that took years to find. I hear people talking about they had a spiritual awakening. I always wonder what the hell they're talking about, because I think, to me, a spiritual awakening is something we're going to be having the rest of our lives, that every day we wake up, a little more spirituality comes in. And for me, being spiritual is living the best life I can for that day. But what this program has given me is some spiritual experiences. And I cherish them with all my heart. When they told me, if you keep coming, it will get better beyond anything you ever dreamt, I used to hate I hated all those phrases we were ever taught. You're exactly where you are. I wanted to slap the shit out of everybody who told me that. And I used to hate it when they said it would get better, because I wanted to know how, when, and why. And there wasn't any answers. And the sad thing is, I found out I don't have those answers either, but it really does happen. And the first time I can remember in NA feeling that real strong was in New Haven, Connecticut. There was an East Coast convention, and it was at Yale University. And Peter and I were talking about it tonight. The bikers meeting. So bikers from all over would pull into the convention. And here was Yale University, and as you pulled up, all you saw was this row of motorcycles that went like forever. And this cab driver looked at me and said, I've never seen the campus like this. What's going on? And all I could do was laugh. But the night of the banquet, there were so many people, and you have to remember this is quite a few years ago, and NA wasn't as big as it is today. The night of the banquet, we couldn't fit around the room, so they asked us to go out into the campus to form the circle, to say the closing prayer. And we went out and we formed the circle, and I can remember standing there not being able to say the serenity prayer because the tears were streaming down my face. There were 2,000 recovering addicts standing in the middle of Yale University. And that feeling happened. And the closest way that I can describe that feeling, it's those rare moments when you know without any doubt in your mind you're exactly where you were supposed to be at that given time. The feeling doesn't last long, But when it comes, there's this overwhelming calmness starts to happen. It happened for me again at the World Convention in Chicago. I was sitting at a table, and I think it was a round table like this, and there was either 10 or 12 of us. And there was this man sitting opposite me. And we were sitting there, and I wrote him a note, and I passed it around the table, and it got to him, and he read the note, and he closed the note up, and he held it to his heart, and he started to cry. And I started to cry. 25 years before that night, when I was using, I used to hang out in a place in New York that became known as Needle Park. And depending on what drug I was on, depended on what mood I was in. And I guess I was messing with some pills, because I was evil this particular day. And that's usually what pills did to me. And I was standing out on Broadway, and this man came up to me, and he said to me, "Are you okay?" And I remember looking up at him and saying, "Get out of my face." And he said to me, "Have you eaten dinner?" I got louder. And I said, "I told you to get away from me." By now, a crowd had started to gather around us. And you have to remember, I was a hooker in those days. And out of his mouth came the wrong thing. He said to me, "Do you have money to eat?" So now I got louder. And I looked up at him and I said, "Get out of my face. I don't turn any tricks with no fucking priest." And it was Father Dan Egan. He's known as the junkie priest. And he was out there trying to get me to come in off those streets to eat something. And it was him sitting across the table from me in Chicago. And in the note I wrote, 25 years ago on 72nd Street and Broadway, did you ever think that you and I would be sitting in a room with 2,500 recovering addicts? That crazy man used to come out in this little car and pick us up off the streets and say, "Come on, I'm going to take you to a meeting." And again, there was no NA. And the other fellowship did not want active hookers coming in their room. And we used to tell him, "Come on, you know they're not going to let us in." And he used to wear a plaid shirt and a zip-up jacket. And right before we'd get to the meeting, he'd put his hand in his pocket and he would take out a white collar. And he would put this collar on, and I always remember saying to him, "What are you doing?" He'd say to me, "Fran, they're drunks. That means they're all Irish Catholic. They won't throw a priest out." And he was right. We'd walk in the door, and they'd say, "Father, they can't come in here." And he'd just march us in. And I remember asking him one night, "You know we come back out and we use. Why do you bother?" And he said to one of the women one night, "Someplace down inside of here, there's a place. It is a calm, peaceful, loving place. And no drink and no drug can ever take you there. And I'm hoping the day comes when I can help you find that place." And that's what those moments give me, when I'm with somebody and I'm someplace and know this is it. I had sponsored someone for 7 years who I loved with all my heart. She was a real special lady. She lost her 7-year-old son in recovery. I watched her bury him and make it. I watched her go through a trach and have a tube in her throat and have to come to the rooms and hold it to be able to share. And she made it through that. And all of a sudden she got sick. And I knew from the minute she got sick what was wrong. And she kept going to the doctor, taking all these tests. And I kept saying to her, "Carmen, you got to have the HIV test." And she would ignore me. And finally, when she ran out of every other test to take, she agreed to go to the doctor and be tested for AIDS. And she called me up one night and she said, look, you're going to get real angry at me, but we need to talk. And I said, what's the matter? She'd been living with this man for 3 years in a relationship, and she had told him she was going for the test. And he told her that if she did, she would have to move out because he couldn't handle that. And she was calling up to tell me that she was more afraid of being alone than she was of dying. So she wasn't going to have the test taken. And as sad as it was, I understood what she was saying. And I told her, okay, no war, no fighting. So I think you've made a decision to commit suicide, but I understand it. And I hung up the phone, and I was sitting there crying, and my phone rang again. And this guy was on the phone, and he said, is this Fran? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I'm calling from Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and we would like you to come speak at our convention. Well, I got hysterical laughing because I really never knew there was a place called Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And I really did know it was jeans. But all of a sudden, I started to laugh, and I said to him, you don't know what perfect timing this phone call was, because it pulled me out of sitting there crying. And I agreed I would come to Oshkosh, Wisconsin. All the way on this plane, I'm saying to myself, what the hell are you doing in Oshkosh, Wisconsin? Everybody in New York thought it was hilarious. They said the cows must be shooting dope. Well, I get there and I find out Shelley and Peter are there. I said, fine, somebody I know. It's always somebody I know someplace. And Shelley and I go out shopping, and we're getting these jeans for my granddaughter. And she said, I'm having a real rough time, and there's a grieving meeting. I said, well, come on, I'm going to go with you. So we go into this meeting, and again, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. While we're there, this young man gets up to share. Matter of fact, Shelley left, and I ended up staying for a little while. And this guy gets up to share, and he talked about this grieving he was going through. And he was new in recovery, and he said, my mother gave me up for adoption when I was born. And I went on a search recently, and I found out where she lived. And I traced it, and I went there to find out she had died a little bit before. And I'm left with the grief of, why didn't she love me? Why didn't she care? And why did she let me go like that? And I didn't say anything. I got up and I left the meeting. And that night we went to the banquet, and I kept watching the door and watching the door. And the man sitting next to me said, who are you looking for? You don't know anybody here. And I said, yeah, there's a young man named Mark, and I want him in this meeting tonight. And Mark was one of the people who didn't have a banquet ticket, so he wasn't at the banquet. But when they opened the doors up later, I spotted him coming in. He was in the back, and they were just serving coffee, so I got up and I went to the back. And I went over to him and I said, Mark, you don't know me, but I'm the speaker tonight, and I want you to know tonight is for you. And I kissed him on the cheek and walked away. The man thought I was totally out of my mind because he didn't know who I was. And I got up and spoke, and I talked about the 12 steps like I always do. And at the end, I began to talk about things that I have done in my recovery to help put my life together. And one of the things that I have done is when I was in prison, I gave birth to a daughter who I decided to give up for adoption. And recently I had gone to a place where you can sign up and register if you're a birth parent who's willing to be found, so that if the adoptee is doing a search, you've given the permission to find you. And I went on to explain that the reason I did that is because I felt she had the right to her roots. And more important than that, she had a right to know that I had already destroyed the life of 2 children. And I finally loved another human being enough to give them a shot at life that I knew I couldn't give her, because I had no intentions of coming out and doing anything right. And I didn't want to destroy another human being. And as I finished, I looked over and Mark was crying. And we went out and we spent that whole weekend together. And he said to me, "You'll never know what you gave me tonight." He said, "It never dawned on me that she could have given me up because she cared about me, or that she wanted me to have a good life." He says, "I always thought it's because she didn't care." And he said, "You've given me so much to go to now in my recovery." And I remember telling him, "You don't know what you just gave me, Mark." And he said, "What?" I said, "I now know why I'm in Oshkosh, Wisconsin." It was again one of those nights where I was allowed that spiritual experience of knowing I'm here for a reason. I went on to college, and then I got a phone call from Arizona asking me to come in and speak at their convention, and it was Memorial Day weekend. And I thought, great, I've never been to Arizona. I was also in therapy at that time. I remember going in and telling my therapist, I said, "Oh, I'm going to Arizona." And she goes, "Oh, no, you're not." Because the convention happened to fall on the very night that I was graduating from graduate school. And my therapist said to me, "You have never, ever been able to take acknowledgement for anything you have completed. You are going to get up on that stage and you are going to get your diploma, and Arizona can wait a year." And she was right, and I did. And that feeling of being up on a stage and getting a diploma with your master's, knowing I had walked out of a prison years before, was just like beyond anything I thought could happen. And sure enough, Arizona called me the following year. And they said, "Okay, you couldn't make it last year. Will you come this year?" And I said, "Yep, I'll be there this year." And I went to that convention to speak in Arizona exactly when I was supposed to. Because at that convention in Arizona, I met my daughter, who I gave up for adoption 23 years ago. And that was a night beyond my wildest dreams. We had contacted each other a month before. She had found me. And I went through a whole lot of changes, but good changes about it. Because the social worker calls first to make sure it's okay to make the connection. And she kept asking me these strange questions. And I said to her, "Okay, hold it. You're looking for something, and let's stop beating around the bush. What do you want to know?" And she said, "Well, years ago when people gave up children for adoption, they lied about it, and they went on with their life, and now years later this kid arrives at the door, and you're faced with all these people you've lied to. And we want to know how you feel about that." And I can remember being on the phone with this big smile on my face saying, "God, how lucky I am." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I belong to a fellowship that taught me I could have no secrets. And there are thousands of people in NA who knew I had given up a daughter for adoption. And I had the privilege of being able to hang up that phone from that social worker and call up everybody in my life and say, guess what just happened? I didn't have to lie. I didn't have to run from it." And it was amazing when I met her, because we had made a place to meet in the lobby. And she had arrived in Arizona 4 hours before she was due. And I was walking out of a restaurant as she was walking into one, and we stopped dead in our tracks because she was an absolute duplicate, and both of us knew who the other one was. Peter said it's a perfect example how we can really not get too concerned about this being a family disease. This is a child I didn't even raise or have anything to do with, and she's an addict. We just give birth to them. We don't have to be around. She thinks she's an ex-addict. I was glad she had a weekend experience. I met a grandchild I didn't know I had, and we are busy building a relationship. I got left with some scars. When my daughter died, she was 21. She was the one I was the closest to because naturally she was the problem. She was the addict. And when she died, I thought there would be a hole left inside my gut that would never, ever again be filled. The pain of missing her for a long time was real tough. And all of a sudden, my oldest daughter began to adopt children because she couldn't have any. And I have 2 grandchildren from Korea. And when the oldest one was old enough to start talking, because she's 5 now, and when she gets on that phone with me and she says, "Hi, Grandma, I love you," there is no more void. There is no more hole left anymore. And I realize the gift that this program has given me. I can now do for my daughter's kids what I could never, ever do for my daughter. I have been given a chance to do this again. I can make up in her life for all the times I wasn't there and the things I couldn't do. I sucked as a mother, but I'm having a wonderful, wonderful time being a grandmother. The women in my life are special. I couldn't imagine my life without the people I sponsor. When Shelley and I spent that weekend together 3 years ago, I remember coming off the podium and she looked at me and she said, "You just told my story." And somehow we just clicked. And we were just at the table laughing because we were sitting there with Carol, and I said to Shelley, "God, isn't she feminine? There's just something so," and I couldn't find the right word, and it was almost like classy about Carol, and I was being nice, and Shelley looked at me and says, "You mean not like us?" And I said, "Yeah, not like us." There's that rough edge, but it's the edge I love. It's the women I love to sponsor. Women have helped me have a relationship in my life today with a man. I do a lot of kidding about John, but it is the first time that I am in a relationship where usually in relationships the biggest plan I make is where we're going on our next vacation. That's about as much of a commitment as we're going to go for. And all of a sudden there's a man in my life and we're buying a home together. We plan on moving to Hawaii in 4 years because we loved it there and the fellowship is strong there. I can fight with him today and know that's okay and it doesn't mean the end of a relationship. I'm able to cry in front of him, and that was a progress for me. First it began by just telling him he got me upset. Then I was able to tell him I cried, and then I was able to cry in front of him. And all of a sudden there's someone in my life who I can trust. And I realized that the most normal thing about a relationship is there are nights I sit there in the living room and I look over at him and this real warm feeling comes. And I think, God, I really love him. And there are other nights I'm in the living room and I look across the hall at him, the room, and I think, what the hell am I sitting here with this guy for? And I also learned that a relationship begins when lust ends, because now you look at what you got and what are you going to do with this shit? We have to now learn how to live with each other without the fireworks going off, because they don't go off anymore. And that's okay, and that's fun. A lot of good things have happened in my life. I still go through a lot of denial every once in a while. Bill reminded me of this when I was going past him. He says, don't forget, When denial comes into my life, there's two things I try to remember. I keep them real up front in my life to remind me of what an addict I am. Now, one gets a little humorous. It's the one Bill likes. When I want to think that I really wasn't that bad, I have to remember most of my arrests were for robberies, violence. I only took one drug arrest. And what happened is I was with my crime partner, another woman, and we were in my apartment, and we were stoned out of our heads, and we got into a real bad fight, and I pulled a knife. And what happened was she owed me $500, and she wouldn't pay me the money. And I guess the neighbors heard us, and they called the police. The police came knocking on the door. There's drug paraphernalia all over the place. There's drugs all over the place, but I'm so stoned, I opened the goddamn door and let the police come in. They look around the room at all this drugs. They look at me, they look at her, and they said, "What's the problem?" I says, "The bitch owes me $500 and she won't pay me." And he looked down at the kitchen table and he said, "Is this what you're fighting over?" And I said, "Yeah." Needless to say, we were arrested that night, and what we were fighting over is we were playing Monopoly, and she had landed on my property, and she didn't pay me. I was so stoned that that money was as real to me as anything, and I wanted my money. And I need to remember that a game of Monopoly took me to jail. The other thing I keep very much up front doesn't have as much humor to it. It was the one secret I held on to in my fifth step until a few years ago when I was able to share it. One of the things that I did while I was using is I was living in a town in New Jersey. The guy I copped from was a cop. I was getting sick. I needed my drugs real bad. I called his house to find out he was on duty that night, and that meant his partner was with him in the car, so I had to be real careful. And I knew I had to get him to my house to get my drugs. I took my 9-month-old daughter, I filled the bathtub full of water, and I floated her in it until I got enough water in her lungs that I could call 911 and have the cop come to my house. So while he was trying to save my daughter, I could get my drugs. I didn't give a shit that she could die. I never even thought of it. All I knew is I needed my drugs. And whenever I have the audacity to think maybe I wasn't that bad, I need to remember where that shit took me. And I don't want any part of that life ever again. NA has given me more than I can ever give it back. It has given me my life, my kids, my relationship, the women in my life. Even to come here and spend the morning with Shell. I mean, we walked and we talked and we walked and we talked. I love having people like that in my life. You've given me that. And for that, I have such gratitude. And thank you for giving me a room where I can say I'm Fran and I'm an addict.
I was just asked, does this mean we can smoke? No, it does not. Okay. Thank you, Fran. Thank you. You touched my heart in many places, I'm sure many other people's heart. Thank you. Give her another round. During the time I was recognizing people who have helped out in the convention, while sitting there, I realized that I neglected a couple of areas. One was the Serenity Keepers and Huggers. And our program committee had a taping committee along with it. Paul G. was the chair of that. Yeah, Paul. And many people who helped, along with Earl. We're now going to move into the rest of the doings with the roll call and the clean time and stuff. And at this time, I'd like to ask Guy B. to come up and do our roll call.
Everybody, my name is Guy. I'm an addict. Speak up. I think I can speak for everybody on behalf of the convention committee when I'd like to say that everybody we've spoke to so far this weekend has said that this has been a great convention. And nobody has told us it's just been fair to Midland. We'd like to deviate from our agenda real fast. Pauline, you'd like to come on up here?
I'm an addict. My name's Pauline. Louder? Can you hear back there? Because as far as I'm concerned, this is the most important thing of the whole weekend. We traditionally give the chair of the convention a present from the committee, and when they asked me to give it to him, I was really honored. But this is not about me, unfortunately. Paige, you want to bring it up? Okay. Logo signed by the entire committee and all our speakers. There's only one reason everything went so well this weekend, and that's because we have a chair who has so much love and peace in his heart that he could keep all of us calm despite everything that happened. And it was really a privilege to work on this committee. Thank you.
Okay, for those of you who have never seen this take place before, this is what we like to traditionally call our roll call. It's not really the who's who, but rather who's from where in NA. Do we have anybody here tonight, any addicts from the state of Alabama? We have any NA members from Alaska? Arizona? Arkansas? California? Do we have any NA members from Colorado? Connecticut? How about Canada? We have any NA members tonight from Delaware? Yeah. Any NA members tonight from the state of Florida? Yeah. How about the state of Georgia? NA members from Hawaii? We have any NA members from Idaho? The NA members here tonight with us from Illinois? We have any NA members with us tonight from the neighboring state of Indiana? Iowa? Kansas? Okay, we have any NA members with us tonight from Kentucky? Louisiana? Do we have any NA members with us tonight from Maine? Damn. We have any NA members with us tonight from Maryland? Yes. I always have a hard time pronouncing this one. We have anybody here tonight from Massachusetts? We have any members with us tonight from Minnesota? Yes. Is there any addicts here from Mississippi? Missouri? Montana? Nebraska? Nevada? New Hampshire? New Jersey? Yeah. We have any NA members from New Mexico? How about the great state of New York? North Carolina? North Dakota? We have any members from Oklahoma? Oregon? How about Pennsylvania? Do we have any NA members tonight with us from Rhode Island? South Carolina? South Dakota? Do we have any members from the Volunteer Region, Tennessee tonight? Any NA members from Texas? Utah? We have any NA members from Vermont? Any NA members from Virginia? Do we have any members with us tonight from Washington? West Virginia? Do we have any members from Wyoming? Do we have any members with us tonight from Wisconsin? Yes, there was one we left out, but somebody told me to remind. We have any members tonight from Ohio? I'll bet you members from Ohio thought you were going to be the biggest contingency here. Check this out. Do we have anybody from the Michigan region?
I'm an addict. My name's Willard. Good evening, family. Turn it up. Okay, this is a time that we get a chance to celebrate our freedom. This is not meant to distinguish one addict from another. We want to share in our joy. For those that have been around for a while, we hope as they stand up that it provides hope to those that have just come. And we know that those who are new to the fellowship provide those that have been around with hope and proof that the fellowship works. So we'll begin. Is there any addict in the room that has 30 or more years of clean time? Is there any addict in the room that has 25 to 30 years clean time? Anywhere in there? Is there any addict that has 20 to 25 years clean time? Yeah! Is there any addict that's been in recovery for 19 years? 18 years? Yo. Seventeen years. 16 years. 15 years. Ram. That's what we have to look for now. 14 years. $13 years. $12 years. $11 years. Yeah. $10 years. Yeah. $9 years.